let's talk a little bit about the public sector. I already mentioned the Cyber Resilience Act in Europe. That is one approach that governments are taking in terms of open source and, well, in terms of software projects and infrastructure, including open source. But this is not the only way how governments are approaching the open source space. For example, Phil and I talked to Federico Gonzalez Waite on season 2, and he shared his experience with us as kind of a case study in terms of how the Mexican government has approached the open source space. And what they did, they actually rolled out policies that were in favor of using and relying on open source software as part of the government's tools and infrastructure that they use, and also as a recommendation to the public sector, and then having that trickle out to the corporate sector as well. And so far, Mexico seems to have a very good experience with switching over to more open source based solutions rather than keeping everything proprietary coming from proprietary vendors. Because the government recognized that using proprietary software means that they are locked in and they are somewhat at the mercy of the software vendor companies. And it's not a good thing. So, they started an experiment and an approach where they started to build their own tools and infrastructure using open source software. You can think of projects like the Linux kernel and OpenStack, Kubernetes, and more. And by relying on open source projects, they were able to take control over their infrastructure, be more educated about what is being put in place, how those components work, and they had access to very often global communities with experts about how those projects and software components work. I have a segment for you with Federico where he talks about this and the value of open source in a bit more detail.
When you talk about implementing open source, people tend to think that you're crazy. Surprisingly enough, one of the ones that has created one of the most private technologies wrote that the people that are crazy enough to think that they can change the world can change it. And that was Steve Jobs. So I think we do need to be kind of like crazy, especially if we are in these government roles. So anybody that's working government and that's thinking about doing open source implementations or leading a big agency, I think you need to be crazy enough. You need to have a fearless ideology because everybody is going to question what you do. But I do think it's the right track. So like, and a lot of people sometimes also think about like, how does the legislation have to breach the technology? And a lot of the time what I saw was that that's not true. Like legislation and manuals and processes can be modified in order to adjust to new technologies. So we shouldn't be afraid of that. We shouldn't be afraid about the capacity that people are going to have because people, when they want to learn, they can learn. And that can be a very big thing for launching and driving technology forward. So we just need to try to work in being fearless leaders in doing these digital transformations towards open source in whatever way that you want to do it, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's in artificial intelligence now, whether it is platforms, because there's always a way. And as long as you manage the people side of it the right way, everything would be a success. And remember that you're not alone. There is a community out there. There are people that have done this before. I'm happy to be reached out. Like people can look for me in LinkedIn and send me a message. Like I've already had it where people say like, oh, we heard that we did this. And if we have, or we did find the solution at some point, we're happy to do it. So just don't be afraid about taking on these kind of challenges. And whenever you can try to evangelize people, no, and like back to the big question of how do we make people understand our tribe and understand this, I think when we start talking about it, because I think it's also one of those things that we talk about it within ourselves, but a lot of time we don't talk to other people. No? So once we can convince our administration person that the technology is worth it and it can have a lot of benefits and it does save money and then there is a community. What I've also seen is that once those kind of people are convinced, then they are the ones that ask for open source solutions.
Yeah, they become evangelists. Yeah.
And they become your supporters, no, and whether it's within your institution or when they move to another institution, then they are the evangelists and they're also pulling everything towards this ideology that we've got. And I think what we're doing as a worldwide movement, it's amazing. I think it's just being part of this community has really changed perspective on things. And just there are some really interesting people within the community. So if you're from outside the community, you're always welcome to come and talk to us as well.